British multiculturalism is starting to look a little lonely around the world, and that in itself opens a deep post-Brexit irony in British politics. So this week, we're thinking in the context of a parliamentary period dominated yet again by the Safety of Rwanda bill, that Rishi Sunak measure still opposed because it's not even tough enough, not quite harsh enough by lots of MPs on the right, 60 rebels in the First Amendments. And indeed, the authority of Rishi Sunak's government, its kind of purpose, is on the line in this bill. And yet I think Westminster has been the victim of a lot of doublespeak and euphemism when it comes to migration. Because the truth of the matter is, below the surface, a lot of this is about what we used to call race. Now, as somebody of respectable views, I don't even like using the word race. Two reasons. One, it has no scientific validity at all. It's a meaningless term in science. But second, because it's been weaponized for so long by people who simply hate those of a different color, different ethnic origin, different religion, and so forth. And yet, the question, let's put it this way, of skin colour of migrants coming into Europe is inescapable. And I'm afraid the brutal truth is that people on the centre-left are mostly too fastidious, too scared perhaps to talk about this issue, but I think we have to. And we have to because when we look across the continent, we see this is a European-wide issue. Almost everywhere there are populist right-wing revolts against the establishment based on migration. And almost everywhere, people like to pretend it's about something else, anything at all. It's about the poor wages of German farmers or Dutch farmers, or it's about crime on the streets of the French cities, or it's about this or that. No, a lot of this is about the skin colour of other people coming into Europe. So, meanwhile, we have some of the leaders of Alternative für Deutschland, the German right-wing party, meeting with outright neo-Nazis in a hotel near Berlin to discuss a scheme of deportation, remigration they call it, of unassimilated migrants into Germany to be sent to somewhere in North Africa, a new kind of model state in North Africa. We've heard of this before. Meanwhile, we have Geert Wilders, the so-called Dutch Freedom Party leader.
So I rather would have no Quran at all, as we, in Holland at least, have outlawed Mein Kampf.
Who is openly Islamophobic, comparing the Quran to Mein Kampf and calling for no more mosques and indeed the demolishing of mosques in the Netherlands. His party romping ahead in the elections there. And indeed, meanwhile, we have Vox in Spain. We have the openly Islamophobic Chega party in Portugal. We have Orban's Hungary. And in Italy, we have Giorgio Meloni's Brothers of Italy. I could go on and on and on. I could talk about the Sweden Democrats, the Finns, and many, many other countries. But everywhere there seems to be a revolt against, frankly, migration.
These are the borders of Italy, for sure, but they are equally the borders of Europe.
And I think this puts us in Britain in a rather unfamiliar position. Because if you think back to the Brexit arguments as they were originally cast, I think an awful lot of people on the centre-left, so-called progressives, thought that we had to stay inside Europe because it was a kind of protection, a kind of soft, liberal prophylactic against British xenophobia. It was a safe place to be. It was our happy place. And on the other hand, you got people who are ardent Brexiteers who, frankly, wanted and yearned for a whiter, more old-fashioned Britain. Now, what's actually happened is because in Britain we now depend very, very heavily on trade deals and agreements with places way beyond Europe, in Africa, in Asia. I'm thinking about India in particular and Nigeria. These are countries which want visa deals in return for freer and better trade deals. And the truth is that we are becoming a less white country as a result of Brexit. We may be getting fewer Poles and fewer Lithuanians, but we are getting more people from Asia, more people from Africa, and that is likely to continue. And I just wonder, when Brexiteers, hardcore Brexiteers, realise that the end result of their policy has been to make Britain a less white country, will that be the final nail in the coffin of that particular political philosophy? And it leaves Britain, particularly with Trump roaring ahead after the Iowa caucuses in the United States, on an agenda using, frankly, pretty 1930s, pretty fascist language about invaders and the contamination of American blood by outsiders.
They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done.
It leaves us in Britain beginning to look like rather an unusual haven for multiculturalism, a country which has a tradition of tolerance and one that we are holding aloft in a less tolerant and more dangerous world around us. So am I saying that we are somehow better, more tolerant, different from other European peoples? Absolutely not. We have our backlash too. We'd had Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, talking about the failure of multiculturalism.
Inadequate integration and a misguided dogma of multiculturalism have proven a toxic combination for Europe over the last few decades.
More recently, Richard Tice, leader of the Reform UK party, saying much the same thing.
I don't think she's gone far enough.
I think what has really made the difference, and Richard Tice himself put his finger on it, is the electoral system, because we have a tradition in this country, first past the post, of, frankly, the Conservative Party mopping up, absorbing lots of voters who in other political systems would be attracted by more right-wing parties. And this has been a struggle inside the Conservative Party ever since the Second World War. I think of the battles against the League of Empire loyalists and giving way to more restrictive immigration legislation as a result in the 1950s. I think of Powellism after that and the struggles between Enoch Powell and Ted Heath over the Ugandan Asian migration. I think of the National Front in the period beyond that, the British National Party, and indeed the only partly successful attempts by the Conservatives more recently to absorb UKIP voters. And of course they had to do that by conceding a referendum which left us outside the EU. So that was a really major moment. Again and again and again, sometimes by taking brave stands, but very often by appeasement and retreat, the Conservative Party has absorbed really hardline right-wing views, which, as I say, in other countries might have been alternative for England, perhaps, or Vox or Voice in Britain. And the reason they haven't done well is the first past the post system, which is the reason that Reform UK is so strongly against it, and Nigel Farage campaigns against it. So that, I think, is really the background to where we are. And in many ways, this week's arguments about the Rwanda bill are just the latest iteration of that very, very old story. Conservatives looking to their right, being aware of voters further to their right, and wondering how to handle them. In this case, a very urgent debate in the Daily Telegraph and other places about the effects of Reform UK on the crumbling Conservative vote. And yet I do think that because so much of the country is turning its back on the Conservatives for other reasons as well, and because the Rwanda bill is now splitting the Conservative Party so fundamentally between the right and people who are much more concerned with abiding by international law, I think perhaps this long, long story that goes on, as I say, back to the aftermath of the Second World War in Conservative history may be coming to an end. This may be the end of that process of accommodation. We may be moving into a period of new politics on all of this. And the question, therefore, is where does that leave the centre-left? And I think the first thing to say is the centre-left should not be complacent about this. There are still very, very large numbers of people in this country furious about migration and furious and worried in particular about the migration of black and Asian people into this country and the cultures they bring. That argument is not going to go away. But I think the second thing is really important, is not to assume that politics is dominant in this, particularly party politics. I used to believe that when it came to changing people's attitudes, the state was really powerful. It could use the education system, it could use its huge megaphone to start to shift attitudes to things like integration. I don't believe that any longer. I think the state is too incompetent, too far away, and in many cases too disliked to be very, very influential. I think when it comes to integration and multiculturalism, by far the biggest force in Britain today is the market, the private sector. If you want to see woke at full throttle, don't go and look at the Liberal Democrats or the Greens or the left of the Labour Party for big influencers. Look at capitalism. Look at the big corporations. Look at the city. Look at the banks. Look at the lawyers. Look at the buyers of advertising. Look at the advertising agencies. Because, like the universities, like the hospitals, private and public across the UK, they are not really interested in abstract notions of citizenship and the political community or the political family. They are interested in customers and they're interested in employees. And they're all in a constant, endless market, quite a ferocious market competition for both employees and customers. They want to sell to everybody. They want to employ as big a range of people as is humanly possible. And that is why they are very, very strong forces for cultural integration in this country. If you occasionally ask yourself why it is that so many, detective series on television have black and Asian stars, if you even ask yourself why so many traditional plays at the West End have a black cast, think of Occam's razor, the simplest answer. This is not because of some weird, obscure, hidden from you liberal conspiracy. This is because of the hunt for customers and the hunt for employees. It's very straightforward. It is a capitalist demand. The producers, the people with the money in the theatre world, and the advertisers in the world of television and indeed film, they want to see black and Asian faces because that is the future and that is their future. That's where their profits are going to come from. So if the hard right in this country really wants to go to war on the issue of multiculturalism and integration, let them try. They will be taking on the entire market and capitalist system, not just a few left-wing councils and politicians. Does this mean that the rest of us should therefore relax about race and integration in this country and accept there are changes which are just washing around us all the time? I would argue absolutely not. We should see this instead for what it really is, an argument about values and about culture. Let me give you an example. I find myself to be instinctively liberal around issues like abortion, women's rights, sexuality and gender, and right to die. And that puts me in opposition, certainly, to the big main traditional religions. It makes me hostile to the positions taken by Islam on that. It makes me hostile as well to the positions taken by Roman Catholicism or Pentecostalism or evangelical Christianity of different kinds. It doesn't make me hostile to individuals in those religions or from those cultures who agree with me, of course, but there is a cultural argument to be had that we should not shy away from here. The future, if it's going to be a good future, is one in which, as it were, traditional British values of reticence, fairness and tolerance are dominant, and where even the big religious groups accept that they have to live alongside and among people of secular and other views who don't agree with them. That is the best future for us. So this means that good government's job is to hold the ring when these arguments are being had and to ensure that we don't fall into some kind of extremism in any direction. It is not to try to reshape the nature of the civilization that we inhabit. We are doing that, thank you very much, for ourselves. Thank you for watching. I would really love to know what you think, so please, if you can, leave a comment below and don't forget to subscribe so that you can get videos from the New Statesman as soon as they're released.